In 1971, a young couple pulled up to a quiet pizza place for a simple night out. But before they even reached the door, they noticed 3 teenage boys lingering outside, staring at them, not talking, not moving, just watching. Inside, while placing their order, the boyfriend leaned toward the cashier and whispered, "Do you know those guys out front?" The cashier shook his head. "No, never seen them before." What the couple didn't know was that one of the boys had already slipped into their car, crouched down, waiting. When the pair finally got back into the vehicle and drove off, the other 2 boys followed in a separate car, trailing them through the dark. A few miles later, the hidden boy rose up from the back seat, gun in hand, and ordered the boyfriend to keep driving, farther, away from town, away from help. At a remote, isolated spot, the nightmare unfolded. The boyfriend was forced to watch helplessly as his girlfriend was assaulted, and when the boys were done, they shot the couple and left them for dead in the cold silence of the night. But the killers weren't done. They wanted recognition. Days later, they bragged about what they'd done to a notorious motorcycle gang, hoping the brutality of their crime would finally earn the gang's respect, a place among them. Instead, the gang turned them in.
Her injuries were so brutal that people said she resembled Miss Pac-Man. 32-year-old Alejandro Ico Chubb was a mother of 3 from Guatemala. She was in a relationship with 42-year-old Mario Tut Ical, but behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. On October 29th of 2018, Mario came home and he was filled with jealousy. He believed that Alejandra wasn't being truthful about seeing her sister, and instead of confronting her about it, he completely lost control. He grabbed a machete and stormed into the bedroom where Alejandra was resting, and in a fit of rage, he struck with full force, severing both of her hands and leaving a horrific wound across her face from ear to ear. The violence was so extreme that later on people would compare her face wounds to the arcade character Miss Pac-Man. To make matters even worse, Alejandra was alive for the entire thing. Her children were watching and they were screaming in the background while Mario was recording it all. Mario fled the scene, and since neighbors could hear screaming coming from their home, they waited for Mario to leave and then they went to go check on Alejandra. Once they went to go check on her, she was barely alive, and once help finally arrived, it was already too late. 2 days later, Mario was captured, and when he was questioned, he admitted to everything and stated that jealousy was his motive. In August of 2023, nearly 5 years later, Mario was sentenced to 50 years in prison for femicide.
She faked her own kidnapping to go viral, and it went horribly, horribly wrong. It was October 2020 in Chihuahua in Mexico. Firstly, what a cute name for a place. 20-year-old Arlene Martinez was a gorgeous girl really trying to make it as an influencer. She had a 1-year-old baby and honestly wanted to go viral and get a load of followers so that she could make some money. But she felt like she was just hitting a brick wall. No matter what video she put out, it didn't feel like it was hitting the way she wanted it to. She was kind of like, do you know what? I think I need to go bigger. I need to do something big to get all of the views. And she knew that doing controversial, potentially dangerous stunts could honestly make her headline news. But she ended up being on the headlines for all of the wrong reasons. Who remembers Marina Joyce and the whole Save Marina Joyce movement? I feel like that's what she was going for. So Arlene decided she was gonna fake her own kidnapping. And as crazy and dangerous as this sounds, she actually had a whole bunch of friends that seemed to want to go along with this with her. They agreed to help. They even had weapons that could have been used in the videos. How they got their hands on these weapons is beyond me, honestly. They planned this thing like a whole movie production. They were going to tie her up, blindfold her, and even have her screaming at the top of her lungs. And it looked extremely realistic. Even watching it, knowing that it was fake initially, I felt uncomfortable. So the whole scuffle is going on and it's supposed to be acting, and then a huge bang. And at first it's just okay, is this special effects? Is this just really great acting? But no. One of the weapons had gone off. She'd been shot in the head. And as if that wasn't shocking enough, these so-called friends didn't even try and stop and resuscitate her or get her medical help. They legged it out of the door, jumped in a Jeep, and drove off. May friends like this never find me. But because a shot had been fired and obviously it was loud, somebody nearby called the police and was like, there's some sort of commotion going on. So police raced over there. They found this girl tied up on the floor, deceased. Now, despite there being literal video evidence of this whole thing that was ultimately actually still posted, despite what happened, as far as I can see, nobody has been held accountable. It's just been disregarded as an accident.
This mother ended the life of her daughter's attacker by burning him alive. In 1998 in Spain, Maria del Carmen Garcia lived with her husband and her 13-year-old daughter, Veronica. On this day, Maria was cooking, making some dinner for the family when she realized she was out of bread, so she asked her daughter, Veronica, if she could go to the store to grab some because the store wasn't too far away from their home. So Veronica heads out, and as she's walking to the store, she ends up seeing her 62-year-old neighbor, Antonio Cosme. Antonio is following Veronica as she's walking to the store, and he ends up forcing her into his car and has her at knife point. At this point, Veronica is really scared, so she gets in his car and he drives her to this wooded area. Unfortunately, Antonio essays this poor girl for hours, and then once he's done with her, he drives her back into their neighborhood and tells her not to say anything or he'll find out and he'll end her life. Once Veronica makes it back home, she doesn't say anything because she is so scared, but Maria gets her to talk about what happened, and immediately she wants to go to police. Once the two go to talk with the police, Antonio ends up getting arrested and he is sentenced to 9 years in prison. On June 13th of 2005, so 7 years later, Maria is out and about just minding her own business when she is approached by Antonio because he got released early, and he tells her, "So how has your daughter been?" And he is just smirking at her. Antonio is then seen walking to a bar to go get some drinks with his friends, and at that moment Maria knew that she wanted to get revenge. So Maria goes to a local gas station and she grabs a container of gasoline and walks over to that bar. As Antonio is sitting at that bar with his friends having a good time, Maria approaches him and pours the gasoline all over him and lights him on fire. The bar erupted in flames and complete chaos. Antonio suffered third-degree burns all over his body and died in the hospital 10 days later. Maria was talking with police. She confessed immediately and stated that she never wanted to end anybody's life, but she imagined what would happen if he ever approached her daughter again and decided she needed to take matters into her own hands. The court initially sentenced Maria to 9.5 years, but was later reduced to 5 years, and she was released in 2009 after serving 4.
This ransom call sent shivers down me spine. Have a listen.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping.
I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the disappearance of Margaret Ellen Fox. Margaret was born on the 4th of February 1960 into a big happy family in Burlington, New Jersey. The family were all extremely close, and the siblings would describe each other as being best friends. Margaret was the only daughter, and she was really into playing the piano and horse riding. In June 1974, she had just graduated from her year 8 class at a Burlington grammar school. Margaret was now 14 years old, and she started to want to become more independent. She started to really develop interests in makeup, fashion, clothes and beauty, and so she decided to get a summer job so that she could buy all of those things for herself. Margaret and her cousin Lynn put an ad into a local Burlington newspaper where they were advertising babysitting services, and soon they got their first job offer. The number that was listed on the ad was for Lynn's home phone, and she got a phone call from a man introducing himself as John Marshall. He was looking for a babysitter for his 5-year-old child to come to his home in nearby Mount Holly, that is around about 7 miles from Burlington. He was offering a really good wage at $40 for 4 hours once a week. The babysitter would get full access to his family pool, again a really good wage, and he even offered to cover their bus fares. Lynn's parents though weren't really comfortable with this. Lynn was still really young, she was only 11, and they just weren't comfortable with putting her on a bus to go and meet a man that they had never met. It would have been different if this was like a family friend or something. Lynn would give John Margaret's details, and when he called her, she gladly accepted the offer with her parents' permission. Margaret awoke bright and early on the 24th of June 1974, excitedly getting ready for her first day at this new babysitting job. She would pack a small bag, taking her swimming costume and her glasses case with her. Her younger brother Joe would walk her to the bus stop, and she got on the bus at around about 8:40 a.m. John had given her very detailed instructions on which bus to get, where to get it to, at what time and what stop she needed to get off at. Once she got off the bus on the other side, him and his wife would be waiting for her in their red VW Beetle. Margaret's mum asked her to ring her when she got to John's house just so she knew that she got there safely. However, the call never came. Now, initially, Margaret's mum tried not to worry. She thought that maybe Margaret had got distracted, she was busy, or she had simply forgotten. However, by the time 2:30 p.m. rolled around and Margaret didn't return home like she was supposed to, that is when she started to feel concerned. Margaret had left a phone number behind for John's house for her mum to ring her if she needed her, and so our mum picked up the phone and started dialing this number, ringing it and ringing it and ringing it until someone on the other end finally answered. The person who answered was a woman, and she told Margaret's mum that no one by the name of Margaret was there, which was confusing. After this woman hung up, her mum continued ringing and ringing the phone until a man picked up and told Margaret's mum that she wasn't calling a house phone, she was calling a payphone. She had been given a false number. Margaret's dad would drive up to Mount Holly and started just driving around it, hoping that he would see his daughter somewhere, but when he didn't, he returned back home and reported her missing to the police. Officers began their investigation and they confirmed that Margaret had got on the bus and she had got off at the stop that she was instructed to. She was then seen talking to a man in a reddish colour car, and then that's it. There are no more sightings of her. The police were able to track down which payphone the calls were made from, and they confirmed that it was a payphone outside of a shop. The manager of the shop that the phone is outside of just so happened to be named John Marshall. This man was very briefly looked into, however he was quickly ruled out because the detective on this case was his friend and he was sure that he wasn't involved. Once Margaret's case hit the news, along with the circumstances that she disappeared, other women began coming forward telling the investigators that their daughter had also been offered fake babysitting jobs by this same man. But none of these women let their daughters go because they weren't comfortable with letting their daughters go to meet a random man. This John Marshall was very adamant that the young girls must travel by bus and alone. This proved that whoever this John was, he had premeditated. He had planned exactly what he was going to do. He knew how to lure these young girls and he was just going to keep trying until he managed to deceive someone. And Margaret just so happened to be the young girl that fell for his trap. The phone inside of the Fox household would ring one day and the man on the other side said that he had Margaret and was demanding a $10,000 ransom in exchange for her safe return. This is an eerie portion of that ransom call.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is a butter topping.
Like, what the fuck is that? The next day, the parents would receive a letter from this alleged abductor who gave details on how the ransom exchange was going to take place, along with some details that no one else should have known, including what Margaret was wearing and something very specific about the glasses case she was carrying with her. That should have been enough to prove that this man was legit. However, just the day before the parents received this letter, those details were put out in the news. So they had no way of knowing if this man was legit. Had he just seen the details in the news and then wrote the letter straight away and sent it? We don't know. Nevertheless, not wanting to take any chances and desperate to have their baby girl back, Margaret's parents withdrew the money and were awaiting the rest of the ransom demands when they received one final letter from the alleged kidnapper saying that the deal was off. And that is where this case stands. Margaret Ellen Fox disappeared over 51 years ago, and we have no idea where she is, what happened to her, and who was responsible.
This is Sarah Bartman, and she would have to go on performing even after death. She's born in 1789, she moves to Cape Town, she works as a washerwoman and a nursemaid, and eventually she becomes a wet nurse for a guy called Hendrik Caesars. Now there's evidence that she has 2 children and both die as babies. In exchange for cash, hers or his, we don't know, Hendrik Caesars begins to show her at a hospital, and there is a surgeon there called Alexander Dunlop. Now, Dunlop is a surgeon who sells on the side animal specimens to showmen in Britain, and he says to her that she should travel to Europe and make money by exhibiting herself. Now, we know that Sarah says no. Sarah might not be her real name, by the way. She says no initially. At some point, she capitulates. We don't know if she agrees and she's convinced or if she's forced. What we do know is that by 1810 she arrives in London and begins exhibiting herself. She lives in a fashionable part of London, but we don't know how she is treated or what autonomy she has. There's a lot of abolitionist sentiment in Britain at this time, so slavery is illegal, and there are lots of groups that are concerned for Sarah's welfare. There's even a court case where Sarah testifies and insists that she's free and making money from the acts, but we don't know whether she actually means it or whether she's being compelled to do so. But by 1814 things are looking even worse for Sarah. She goes to France in September 1814, and then she's sold by a man man called Taylor to a man called John Rio. Now, he exhibits her under more pressured conditions, and she might have been in effect enslaved. Her exhibition becomes more entangled with scientific racism and curiosity, and French scientists are curious about her body. She is now dehumanized. She is an object. She is, some sources suggest, even forced to exhibit herself wearing a collar around the neck. Now, I want to remind you that she came from South Africa, a free woman. After death, one of the museums retains her remains. They preserve her brain, her genitalia, and her skeleton. They cast her body, and they stand the body cast and the skeleton side by side, and they stand it, the body cast, so it's emphasizing her bottom. So to them, she's the Venus Hottentot, and her body is being fetishized by the Western eye, something that has been ongoing for Black women. Her remains are on show until the mid-1970s. At that point, people start to get a bit uncomfortable with what's gone on, the lack of consent, but it takes until 2002 to repatriate her to her homeland, the Gamtos Valley, which happens on May the 6th, and this is her being reburied. Now, I appreciate I usually share more images than this. I've chosen not to share the autopsy results, the scientific drawings, or the cartoons of her which depict her as mostly naked, which she wasn't when she performed. I wanted to tell her story, though her voice has been lost, and I won't share images which continue to reduce her. I chose this one because I think she looks powerful. Now, Sarah was a woman courageous enough to travel to Europe. She is a woman who buried 2 babies and left the land that they were buried in. And she's a woman who had to work as a wet nurse when her own baby died. She was described as pretty and bright. She was strong. She was not a specimen, but a woman and a mother, and she now rests in the same land as her babies. And that is the story of Sarah Bartman.
Can I please have my mom before I go? Please.
Yup, the title here is correct. Unless something changes, and soon, this woman is going to be dead in September of this year. It's hard to not feel bad for this girl without any context. This clip shows her being sentenced to death. She then requests to hug her mother, but that request is ignored. She cries and she's escorted out of the courtroom. Now, some of you guys might recognize the young woman in this video as Krista Pike. In 1995, Krista was arrested for the murder of her classmate Colleen, who she suspected of trying to steal her boy. Krista lured Colleen out to an abandoned steam plant under the guise of making things right. Unbeknownst to Colleen, Krista had 2 of her friends with her. Colleen was immediately attacked and kept alive for 30 minutes until Krista finally dealt the death blow with a chunk of asphalt. Krista kept a piece of Colleen's skull, bragged about it, was arrested, sentenced to death, and recently her execution date has been stated as September 30th of 2026. Doesn't really seem like Krista is that remorseful either. She had an attempted murder charge back in 2001 while in prison, and in 2012 also attempted to escape. We will see what happens, but it looks like this is going to run its course this year.
This is the Casey Anthony case all over again, and that shows to be a bloody bed right there, but let's start from the beginning. In mid-February 2026, a quiet apartment community in Enterprise, Alabama became the center of a case that would turn really, really disturbing. 2-year-old Genesis Nova Reed, a toddler described by family as joyful, playful, and always smiling, was suddenly reported missing in the early hours of February 16, 2026. According to her mother, Adrienne Reed, she woke up around 3 a.m. Genesis was gone from her bed and the front door of their home was open. So she made a call to 911, and that launched a massive search. Local police, state agencies, the FBI, and U.S. Marshals quickly became involved. So at first, Genesis' mom, Adrienne, her story seemed straightforward. Her toddler vanished overnight from her own bed. Okay, and she called 911. However, police find out a bunch of other things. As detectives interviewed neighbors and witnesses, multiple people in the apartment complex made the very same claim. They said that they had not seen Genesis in weeks. Some neighbors even said she had stopped taking her usual neighborhood walks with her mother, and others stated that they had not seen her since around Christmas time. One neighbor even noted that Genesis had stopped playing with the other children earlier in the year. So obviously now that timeline raised a lot of serious red flags. If Genesis had not been seen for weeks, then the idea that she disappeared suddenly overnight became a lot harder to believe. Then detectives began to notice a lot of inconsistencies in Genesis' mother's statement. Police said that the deeper they looked into the report, the more details didn't align well. So they looked even further into the case. At this point, you know she's a suspect. Then the case took a major turn when Adrian was arrested and charged with false reporting to law enforcement after authorities concluded the key parts of her story did not add up. And it turns out that she too had not seen Genesis in a month and she just failed to report it. Is that starting to sound familiar to you? Despite extensive searches, including the use of cadaver dogs and multi-agency resources, authorities reported that no physical evidence leading to Genesis' whereabouts had been discovered. However, on TikTok, there were these searchers. They went into the woods and they found a bloody bed in the middle of the woods. I don't know if that could be a clue. The public doesn't know at the moment. And this was around the area she lived. And then Adrian, the mom, mentions to the cops about a woman named Mariah who supposedly knows where Genesis is, but right now this is looking like the Casey Anthony case. Meanwhile, across parts of southeast Alabama, homes and neighborhoods began glowing pink in honor of Genesis, symbolizing prayers, unity, and heartbreak for a missing toddler. Family members publicly pleaded for help. They emphasized that Genesis would never have willingly left, urging anyone with information to come forward. Right? I mean, that's just really strange for a 2-year-old to just get out of bed and just leave. Genesis' birthday is coming up in March. She was last seen wearing pink Minnie Mouse pajamas. Her mother remained in custody with a $1 million bond, and officials noted concerns that she could be a flight risk if released. If you have any information, please contact 334-347-2222 or just call 911. Stay safe out there, you guys. I hope they find you, Genesis.
These are the best, so here are 5 more cold cases that were solved in 2025. The 1965 murder of Alice Eberhardt. 18-year-old nursing student Alice Jean Eberhardt lived with her family in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. September 24th, 1965, her father returned home and found that his daughter had been stabbed and bludgeoned to death inside the house. Unfortunately, despite an extensive investigation, the case went cold and it remained the borough's only unsolved case for years. In 2021, the Fair Lawn Police Department reopened the investigation and started re-examining evidence and pursuing new interviews. Detectives focused on Richard Cottingham, a notorious serial killer who was already serving multiple life sentences. After years of investigating Cottingham and other leads, in 2025, as his health declined, Cottingham confessed to killing Alice. He provided specific details about the crime scene and the circumstances surrounding her death that had never been publicly released. Authorities did not file new charges since Cottingham is already incarcerated for life, but his confession did give Alice's family answers after 60 years. Rest in peace, Alice. Next, we have Texas's oldest missing persons case, Norman Prater. On January 14, 1973, 16-year-old Norman Lamar Prater was reported missing in East Dallas, Texas. Last seen walking with friends and then told them he was headed home, but he never made it there. There were searches for him, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. 6 months later, another young man was killed in a hit and run on Highway 35 near Rockport, Texas. That victim remained unidentified and unconnected to any missing person for decades. In 2025, the medical examiner's office uncovered a previously unseen post-mortem photo of the crash victim. That photo was shared with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and then to Detective Ryan Dalby, the Dallas Police Department's Missing Persons Unit. Detective Dalby and a Texas Rangers forensic analyst noted that there were a lot of similarities between the hit-and-run victim and Norman, who at that point had been missing for more than 50 years. Norman's older brother Isaac was contacted and positively identified his brother from the photo, confirming the victim was Norman Prater. Unfortunately, who committed the hit and run remains unknown, but Norman's family now has answers, and 2 Texas cases were closed. Rest in peace, Norman. The Concord, New Hampshire murder of Judy Lord in 1975. On May 20th, 1975, 22-year-old Judith Judy Lord was found essayed and strangled to death inside her apartment in Concord. Her 17-month-old son was in the apartment and was physically unharmed. In the original investigation, authorities believed a neighbor, Ernest Theodore Gable, was a strong suspect, but forensic technology at the time was limited and an FBI hair analysis pointed away from Gable. As there were no other leads, the case went cold and remained that way for the next 50 years. December 2025, when the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit re-examined the evidence using new DNA testing, and that testing came back with a match. It was announced that Ernest Gable was the person who murdered Judy. Gable died in 1987, so he cannot be charged in Judy's murder. But at least Judy's family finally has answers. Rest in peace, Judy.
When I tell you this is the scariest story I've ever read, I'm not joking. This story had me not sleeping and streaming a 24/7 stream of Bluey. That's how scared I was. So there's a guy and he's just got into a relationship with a girl that he is completely infatuated with. He says he's had relationships in the past, but there's something about this girl that he's drawn to. The moment he saw her, he fell in love with her. Couple of weeks in, he'd already planned that he was going to marry her. He wanted to be with her all the time, thought about her 24/7, wanted to call her 24/7. He was just obsessed. He said he'd never been a hopeless romantic before with past relationships, but with her, he just wanted her. Just everything about her, he was drawn in. He'd already planned out his proposal, their first date. They went on like a 3-hour hike. They had a cheeky kiss at the top of like the peak, and he knew that's where he was going to propose to her exactly a year to the day. He'd already picked out the ring. He was in love with her. However, there was one thing that he thought was drifting them apart. That was, he needed to close the gap. And that was, she never wanted to stay the night, either at her house or his house. It could be 3, 4 a.m. in the morning. As soon as one of them started drifting off, she'd be like, look, you've got to go, or she'd go. And it happened too many times, and he thought there's something that she's hiding from me. After a few months, he finally plucked up the courage to ask her. So while she was at his house, he said, is there a reason why you don't like falling asleep around me? Like, what's the issue? It takes him a bit of time to get the truth out of her, but eventually she admits that she's just started sleep talking and she's a bit embarrassed by it. And when he hears sleep talking, he's like, is that it? Like, my siblings used to sleep talk. I used to be in scouts. People used to sleep talk. Like, I'm used to it. She quickly shuts him down and she's like, no, you don't understand. The stuff that I say is horrific. I say really nasty, vile things, and I don't want you to hear it. And this is when he admits to her that he's in love with her and there is nothing that she can say or do that would ever make him change his feelings. And this reassures her, and eventually he just says, why don't you stay the night tonight? And if it gets bad, we can talk about it in the morning. It takes like a full bottle of wine to agree, but she's like, look, okay. And by the time it gets to bedtime, she says, look, if it does get bad, please do just go to the couch. She says to him, don't respond to me, and please don't wake me up, because when people have woken me up in the past, I get really angry and they say it's not me. And he's like, look, got it, noted. I won't reply to you. I won't wake you up. He goes, but you won't even bother me. Trust me, like, don't worry about it. So they both fall asleep, and after a few hours, he gets woken up and he has a feeling that someone's watching him. But then very quickly he remembers, my girlfriend's here, and he gets that warm, fuzzy feeling because he's thinking about a girl that he's madly in love with, and he goes to put his arm over her shoulder, and she's not in bed. Her side of the bed is empty. So he quickly opens his eyes, and that's when he sees her looking down on him. And she says in a voice that he describes as being like really raspy and really aged, she says, I'll chew the skin off your bones. I'm sorry, what? You'll do what now? I'd be running out of that room so quickly. But my guy just falls asleep. He goes back to sleep and it's like, she just says some weird stuff, but you know, she's obviously having a weird dream. He just back off to sleep and he wakes up again, doesn't know how long's passed. And he says he can feel really hot breath on him, and this breath is rancid. It's like rotten eggs and dead animals, and it's breathing quite quickly in front of his face. And he says it feels like a dog is panting in front of him. And he knows that when he opens his eyes, all he's going to see is his girlfriend. Eventually, something comes over him, and he opens his eyes, and he sees his girlfriend pretty much nose pressed to nose. You better go sleep in the lounge because you'll be dead by morning. I'd be leaving that apartment so fast. But, you know, my guy doesn't even question it. He's like, enough said. He creeps out of bed, he goes to the lounge, and as he's leaving the room, he starts hearing her laugh. Again, it's not her voice. He says it's aged, it's raspy, and he's shit scared. He goes to the couch, and that's where he can hear her saying his name. His name's Stephen. She's going, Stephen, come back. Stephen, I didn't mean to scare you. I told you it was bad, Stephen. But then in between her sentences, she would do this horrible aged laugh. Stephen is basically rocking on this couch because he's thinking, why am I infatuated with this girl that has just said that she's going to kill me? And he's noticing, like, the more that he's replaying this voice in his head that isn't his girlfriend's, the less he's kind of like waking up. And he's like, why am I so in love with her? And he's trying to remember what's different about this girl than his other girlfriends. And he's like, but I don't know what's going on. She's just scaring me. And he's trying to snap himself out of it. And she's still trying to entice him back. She's saying, come back to the bedroom, with this awful cackly laugh in between. And then she's saying, why don't I come to you instead? Now, Stephen said even if he would have heard one footstep, he would have ran out of that apartment so quick. But luckily, she never left. Instead, she starts saying, you're going to walk me up that hill, aren't you, Stephen? You're going to walk me up that hill and you're going to propose to me in exactly a year. I know you're going to do it, and I know you've already picked out the ring. In this weird, raspy voice. That's when he kind of realises that this thing that's speaking out of his girlfriend isn't his girlfriend, because how would she know that he's already planned the proposal? Exactly a year to the day as well. And then he starts to think, has she been possessed? Is something in her? And is he drawn to what's in her rather than his girlfriend? Because he says the way that he feels towards her is infatuation like he's never felt before. He spends the night on the sofa. The next morning, his girlfriend says, how was it? And he says, it was fine. He doesn't know how to tell his girlfriend. What would you do? Has anything like that ever happened to you? What do you think it is? Because that is terrifying. Just the thought of somebody standing over you, I'm going to chew the skin off your bones. I'm sorry, what? You're going to leave. You're going to leave right now where I am.